I'm Celine Williams, and welcome to the Leading Through Crisis podcast, a conversation series exploring resiliency and leadership in challenging times. My guest today is Steffan Surdek, who is the consulting principal, a leadership development coach and corporate trainer, and founder of Surdek Solutions, a consulting and training company based in Montreal. Welcome, Steffan.
Hey, thank you, Celine. I'm happy to be with you today.
I'm happy to have you today. I know we have a number of things that we want to get into, but before we dive into our conversation today, I always start by asking my guests what comes up for them when they hear the title of this podcast, the name of this podcast, which is Leading Through Crisis.
So the first thing that comes to me is how you show up as a leader in times of crisis. How do you interact with your people? What do you project to your people? How do you interact with your people? So for me, leading through a crisis, I always see the calm leader, no matter what is going on. It doesn't mean that you're not disturbed by it in any way, but I see a leader that is able to maintain composure, a leader that is able to tap into the people around them to get answers, to get help, to get solutions to the problems to the crisis that we're facing. Because usually it's not just leading in crisis isn't just about, when a crisis for me, myself, it could be a crisis more for the company or a crisis a little bit more at large. So for me, leading through crisis is to be able to be the person that is able to help people get through that. And I don't mean having the solutions, but meaning being able to channel the people around you to find the solutions, to work together, to work through the crisis.
So can you tell me a little bit or explain a little bit more for our listeners, maybe this idea of channeling the people around you and helping them get through the crisis? Because I think for a lot of people, when they hear that, they think, well, isn't that a nice idea? Doesn't that sound like a nice idea? But what does that really mean? Or, because we get so in our own, and leaders often do this, we get so in our own, I need to solve this problem by myself, that we then don't even know where to start with that.
Yeah, and that gets overwhelming. And often with the leaders I speak to, I often tell them, how easier would your life be if the people around you took more ownership of things that were happening? What kind of problems would you be working on? And I promote something, I talk about something called co-creative leadership, which is as a leader, how can you position yourself in order to be that voice among many inside a big conversation, and just be part of that discussion. And sometimes as leaders, we feel we have the pressure, we put the pressure on ourselves to have the solutions. But then what happens is when we show up that way for our teams, and when this is the belief of our organization, everything hinges on us. And that's a lot of pressure at some point. That's a lot of weight at some point. And I think part of the challenges that many leaders face is they struggle with how do they need to change to be that person that can lean on others, because we don't get taught that. And then we get into conversations around vulnerability. How is it for me as a leader to say, I don't know, I don't have the solution, I need your help? All of those things are the things that are hard in what you said in your question. It's to pivot as a leader and just put yourself out there saying, I don't know the answer, but I know the problem. Can this be our problem instead of my problem?
Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of vulnerability to be able to do that. And I think it also goes to, we may not always know the actual problem as leaders. We might be seeing the symptoms, and we need people to work with us to get to what the actual problem is, because the symptoms can seem overwhelming as they're showing up.
Yeah. And often when we lean on our employees and we're able to go and we're able to ask our management team, we're able to ask the people on the ground, what are the three biggest issues that you're facing right now? They know the problems. But the biggest problem is, as leaders, we forget to ask. So sometimes we assume. So then when we come with a solution, people go, What's this about? Why are you trying to get me to do this? Why? And then all of a sudden, what you start hearing is, oh, this is Celine's project. This is Celine's idea. We're doing this for Celine. And then no one takes ownership. So if we're able to ask people for what they think the problems are, we're able to ask them what they think the solutions are, and we're able to support them in putting those solutions in place, we have a much better chance of people actually stepping up. At least
Mhm.
that's my belief. That's what I've seen in my years as a coach.
So you mentioned the co-creative leadership, and this sounds like it's kind of part and parcel of all of this. Can you explain? I know you have 5 steps to co-creative leadership. I know that this is a concept that you work with extensively in the work that you do. Can you talk a little bit about whether it's the 5 steps or what it kind of encompasses uh, for those of us who might not be familiar with it?
So the end goal, if I had to give the Reader's Digest version, as a co-creative leader, what you're trying to do is you're trying to uh, transform your leadership to create a workplace where people can be more engaged and
Mm,
take more ownership. And to be able to do that, there's 5 key skills that I like to call them. And the first key skill is being a voice among many in the conversation. So this means as a leader, how can you not have to bring your idea last? I've had so many people over the years tell me, as a leader, I feel as if I always need to speak last because as soon as I bring an idea, people say, "Hey, this is what we're doing. This is what Steffan said. We're going to go do this now." But I just wanted to bring an idea. I wanted this to be part of the discussion. So now what I do is I ask my question and now I speak last. But when you do that, what you're doing is you're actually holding the hammer of speaking last. And as soon as you say something again, now you're speaking last. So as a leader, how can you speak at any time in a discussion? How can you invite the people around you to challenge you to how can you go pull the ideas of others and build on top of them to get to the solution that the company needs right now or that the team needs right now? The second key skill is around unleashing the leaders around you. And when we talk about unleashing the leaders around you, what I mean by that is it's hard to hire people right now in the workplace that we're in, and it's even harder to hire good people. So why is it that for so long we've hired people that are bright, that are very lit up when they start working with us, and then all of a sudden we force them to comply to the work environment? And we no, this is how it works here. This is how you should be doing things. And we disengage people when we do that. So for me, unleashing the leaders around you is how can you maximize the leadership potential of the people around you? And one key thing around that is as a leader, it's important to understand that you can share leadership. You can be a leader, but you can also be a follower sometimes. And it's about understanding when to play one role, when to play the other, and how to be supportive when you're a follower. The third key skill is around building the capacity of your team. So one of the things I used to face a lot as a consultant, and I'm sure once I say this, you do coaching as well. I'm sure you may recognize a period of your life. Um, I call it the Moses effect. So what happened is when I started as a coach, I'd go work with a client. The waters would part for me to bring the transformation that I'm trying to create with the client. All the perfect conditions would get in place. And then I do the work. And by the time I'm finished and that I leave, what happened more often than not? The water came, the waters came right back. And that was discouraging as a consultant. And what I realized was I wasn't spending enough time building the capacity of people around me. I wasn't making sure that the people around me could do what I was bringing so that I could leave and they could continue. I was too focused on helping them create results
mm,
instead of sustainable results.
mm,
So building the capacity of your team is about that. How do you, as a leader, develop your team? And here's the key thing. Often people say, "Oh yeah, but I pay for training. Oh yeah, but I get coaches that come and that work with people on my team." It's not about funding things. That's easy. It's about as a leader, how do you be the teacher? How do you understand what people need to learn and help them learn? And that's again the position of vulnerability. The fourth key skill is dancing with the system around you. So when you dance with the system around you, it's about bringing a more systemic point of view perspective to your leadership. So it's about stepping back and taking a look from above at what's happening on your inside your organization. You can dance with the maturity of your team. You can dance with the overall system. You can dance with other departments with who things are going well or not as well. And but how can you approach those from like a more high level perspective and understand that we all work in a complex adaptive system? So you do something and the system is going to adapt. So if I give a more basic example, let's say, for example, you close a street somewhere in the city. The traffic is automatically going to divert and go in another way. And systemic thinking is about that. What happens when you inject something? And I like calling it a dance because you inject something, the system reacts. You inject
Mhm.
something else, the system reacts. Sometimes it does what you'd like, sometimes it does something else. But it's this continuous back and forth, and it's a dance and it's a flow. And when you can see it as this dance, it's a whole lot more fun to play with. The fifth and last key skill is around building a culture that fosters learning by doing. So often teams get paralyzed in analysis paralysis. They are afraid to even start because they're afraid to make a mistake. They want to get the perfect solution out there right up front. And often one thing I hear in at different clients is, oh yeah, but we promote the right to make mistakes here. People are allowed to make mistakes. People are allowed to fail fast. One of my favorite things to say is you should not allow that in companies. It makes no sense. You should not allow people to make mistakes. You should not allow people to fail. Why? Because if you're using that type of language, you're promoting your existing culture, not the new culture that you want. What I tend to suggest instead is focus on, you want to try this? What are you going to learn? What are you trying to learn by doing this? And if you start focusing on doing things to learn, you're going to see that success and failure is not going to matter as much because you're going to make so much more forward progress. And the last thing about giving the permission to make mistakes is when you use that sort of language, what happens sometimes is that people will make a mistake that's actually a fireable offense. And you need to fire that person. And then as soon as you fire that one person, people are going to always say, yeah, you talk about the right to make mistakes, but you remember Sidin when she did and she got fired?
Mhm.
So focus instead on learning because if not you're just doing you're just perpetuating your existing culture. So those are the five key skills in a nutshell.
So, I appreciate you running through all of those. I wanna make a comment on the last and then go back to the first of the 5 key skills. Um, I think it's really interesting what you talk ab what you're saying about don't use the language of mistakes or failure, especially because there are so many speakers, trainers, whatever it is out there right now talking about failure and mistakes and how to incorporate it and embrace it, and what you said makes a lot it really resonated with me in the work that I do. I talk about continuous iteration, which is
Yes,
that, right, which it from design thinking, which is I incorporate a lot of, but that idea of if you're continuously iterating, you're looking for the opportunities to learn. You're constantly checking the learning and growing from them. It's not about, yes, inside of that, you end up recognizing the things that didn't go right, but it's not the language of mistakes or failure. It really is that continuous iteration. And so
exactly.
I really appreciate the way you framed that because I think it is really important to have language, whatever it is that works that promotes the type of culture and connectivity that you want for the people that work in your organization. And I wanted to comment on that because I think I think there's so much about failure out there and not enough about alternatives.
And also sometimes it's not really a mistake or it's not really a failure. You expected it not to work. So really it goes back to the iterations that you're talking about.
Well, it's the fun of the if we pull it back to the scientific and this is I'm gonna nerd out for a second, but if we pull it back to the idea of the scientific method, there are no mistakes in science. There's opportunities to learn. We're checking hypotheses. We're saying, oh, no, that's not the right one. We'll try a new one. It's not mistakes and failure. It is that continuous iteration. It's that scientific method. It's the learning and growth and building and getting better and, just moving forward in some way and building that momentum. But in business, for some reason, we get really stuck on it has to be, or historically, it's changing, I do think, but we've been really stuck on it has to be this way. And there's a
Yeah.
right way. And we just have to get to that right way. And that's just not true.
And we have to get to the right way the first time.
First time.
So sometimes as a leader, it's about seeing, am I blocking my team because of my expectations? How am I showing up?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I do want to go back to the first skill that you mentioned, because one of the things that you talked about inside of that was, you know, not leaders who say they want to speak last, and then how can you have your team challenge your ideas? So I think this is a really interesting concept that I've heard a lot and I've seen in action. When leaders do speak first, then people hesitate. So if they speak first, other people around them will hesitate to present a different idea, and whatever
Yes.
that the most senior leader in the room has said becomes the gospel truth, regardless of whether they have all the information they need to know. Or they hold back until the last idea being pitched, however you want to call it, and then that supersedes the ideas anyways, because they're still the senior leader in the room. And I want to explore this idea that you mentioned of, having your team feel comfortable challenging your ideas so that you can speak at any point in time. And what does that look like? How can leaders do that? Because I do think this is a huge challenge for many, many leaders and many organizations.
So there's multiple layers to this. And the first layer is about noticing your impact as a leader inside the meeting. What happens when you speak? Do people jump on your ideas? Do people stop, or do you interrupt a lot of people? This is something I call your leadership game. How do you show up as a leader? How do you play your game, your role as a leader? And once you start getting clear on your leadership game, it's not about changing it right away. It's about trying to see, can you make little tweaks? For example, a very basic example around creating space is, leaders that will ask a question and that will answer their own question within 2 milliseconds of finishing their question. They're training their teams to not answer because they'll go, well, Steph is asking a question, he's going to answer himself soon, so why should I bother? But from the leader's perspective, they don't like the silence. They're not comfortable with the silence. They don't want to leave that silence, and they feel no one's going to answer. And I often talk about the 7-second rule. Ask a question, count 7 seconds in your head before saying anything else. If no one speaks, ask your question again. Be generous, assume that they're thinking. So, for example, I could say, Sidin, what do you think about? Group, what do you think about? Really? You have no thoughts about this? That's kind of surprising. Come on, you can give me something, right?
Right.
And usually by the second time, someone's going to answer, someone's going to jump in. So your first thing as a leader is to notice what's your impact. What are you doing that's creating those dynamics? I'll give you a second if you want to answer anything here or add anything.
Well, I was going to say, the ability to be comfortable with silence, I think, is a skill set that we do not talk about enough for anyone, because it is so important and we're so used to filling the airtime. And
Yes.
listen, there are times where when that happens, you're like, you have told me more than I would ever have known, just because someone else has continued to need to say things to fill time. Great as a coach sometimes, great as a consultant sometimes to get that information. And as a leader, when you are trying to encourage people to share, open up, create that safe space when you're the one stepping into it over and over again. It's a real challenge. And
Yes.
I know when I started coaching training, when I started doing coaching training, one of the things that was very quickly pointed out to me was how much I was doing that as a coach. Because I was like, oh God, my question wasn't clear enough and I need to clarify my question. And then you would build
Yeah.
and build and build. And I very specifically did some work and had some great trainers who helped me get comfortable with that silence, to the point that I have clients now who will joke that I will be comfortable with silence so long they'll be like, I'm thinking. I promise I'm thinking. I'm like, you're good. Keep, like, take the time you need. And I do think that it is, the more people that can do that, the better conversations we'll have, the better ideas we'll have, the better solutions we'll come to.
Yeah.
And that's all I wanted to comment on was I think we just don't emphasize that skill set enough.
And the other thing to notice is what kind of questions are you asking? Are you asking open questions or closed questions? Are you asking leading questions towards what you would want, or are they really open questions? Those are all part of the answer to your earlier question. How do you create that space? The second layer of it is around noticing the contribution of people. There's some people that are going to speak up more, some people that are going to speak up less. Some that speak up less actually have very good ideas. So if you've had conversations on the side with some people and you know that they have something cool to say, ask them, is it okay if I tug on you the next time we talk about this in one of our team meetings? Because I'd love for you to express that to your team.
Mm.
If you have people that overspeak as part of their contribution, sometimes it's about saying, I really love that you're active, you're lit up, and that you're trying to contribute like that. Another way you can help me is by drawing other people into the conversation. And then inviting those people to kind of help you pull the people that are more introverts inside
Mhm.
of the meeting, but having like a little project with them. Hey, what we're trying to do in the next month is actually get more people involved. So bring your ideas, but measure how often you speak and measure how you can go get other people. And about noticing the contribution, it's also about noticing the people that bring ideas and to say, wow, that was a great idea there. Okay, what can we do? Can we use that as a starting point? And if you start, showing people that you value their ideas, other people are going to start bringing ideas too. Another thing that I do sometimes with clients is I ask them, clarify your intention with your team. So let's say you have a daily meeting with your team every day and you want your team to take ownership. Don't cross your fingers and hope that they're going to take ownership. Say something. What I'd like over the next few months is I would like you to take more ownership of this meeting. So this means I could not be here. The meeting is still going to happen. And you're going to get value out of it because it's not a meeting for me, it's a meeting for you. Another way to do this invitation is, for example, if you really want feedback on an idea, you can say, okay, look, I have this idea that I'd like to present, but I know that you guys don't challenge me a lot as a group. So I'd like us to practice that today. So today I'm going to bring my idea. I expect criticism. I expect to be challenged, and we're going to have fun with this for the next 20, 25 minutes. And if they can't challenge you, teach them. Teach them the kind of challenges you would expect. Model it for them. You could have asked me this. You could have asked me that. You could have asked me that. And it's not about getting there right away. We're talking about skill number 3, building capacity on your team at the same time as we're doing this. So it's about giving them a bit of direction and practicing it. To give you one little example story, I had a leader that the leader would often feel as if they were speaking too much. And they would often comment on that in the meeting. So at one point in my one-on-one with this leader, I said, well, wouldn't it be cool if your team told you? Would you be okay, instead of you saying that we trained your team to tell you? And the person looked at me, smiled, and went, not sure how that's going to work, but okay. So we proposed it to their team. We said, look, this is what's happening. Your boss feels as if he's talking too much, and he's the one commenting. It would be so much more fun if you would tell him. Are you willing to do that for a week? Full permission. And so the first week, no one challenged because everyone was afraid. And at the end of the week, we asked, how often did someone challenge? So then we spoke about why. Why didn't anyone challenge? Oh, we don't know how. Oh, we're not comfortable. Oh, he's my boss. Okay, cool. So what would be an acceptable way? And then we started talking about an acceptable way that the boss would be willing to hear and would not have a strong reaction, because there's a difference between saying shut the heck up and saying, hey, you remember when you asked us if you were speaking too much? Maybe this is how it seems to me right now.
Mm.
And one comes through much better than the other. So we were just trying to teach people how to make it acceptable, and it took us about 3 weeks to start getting it going.
Mm. Yeah. So the big question is, how did that work out in the end? Did he feel like he was getting enough feedback? Take the term feedback with a grain of salt, from the people, that he didn't have to call it out for himself as much?
Yes. Yes, because actually we found a very simple system too. Someone just needed to raise their hand. That's how it kind of worked out in the end. So sometimes it's not even about saying a word.
Yes, it's really fascinating how small, call them hacks, call them indications, whatever it is, and this goes for so many things, from, if we're dysregulated emotionally and someone notices it, if we are that there can be little silly things, playful things, simple things like raising a hand that will kind of be all the indication we need to snap out of that moment and be like, "Oh, this is a thing we've spoken about." So I love that it was just as simple as a hand raise. Um, so um, I have a question about something that you were talking about with the, someone is more introverted, kind of inviting people into the conversation. If someone's more introverted, pulling them aside or speaking to them in between, and inviting them specifically to speak up. And I'm curious, from your perspective, one of the things that I have used that I have seen be very effective is, at the beginning of a meeting, setting a foundation that everyone is expected to speak, and that it will
Yes.
be, either it can be in a circle, we're going to go around and everyone's going to speak, or the popcorn style, or what, but we're there for, everyone is going to be expected to speak into whatever hopefully we have an agenda, there's 3 key questions, whatever the case is. But this is not a, no one gets to say anything, or, only 2 people's opinions, but everyone's going to be expected to speak. And that has been very effective, in the sense that even those who are extremely introverted know that that's coming, and they know that that is the expectation setting up. And I know that there's some people who don't agree with that as a foundation, let's call it that. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what you think of things like that, as if that is part and parcel, or could be part and parcel of a
It
co-creative leadership, or if you're like, that is definitely not it.
it could be, like, from my perspective, some people call those rules of engagement
Mhm.
for the meeting. I don't like the term rules of engagement. My term
Neither do
for
I,
it
that's
is
why I didn't
working
use it.
agreement. Yes, but I'm saying it because I'm sure people in the audience have heard that in their workplace,
For sure.
right? Because it's the common term. But already, just listen, rules of engagement, we're going to war. It's like, really?
Yeah.
So I much prefer the term working agreement. This is how we want to play.
Yep.
And if it's here, where I go maybe a bit further, or I see this a little bit differently than you, maybe we see it the same way, is I say anything on this sheet, anyone is allowed to talk about as well. So if we have, as part of our working agreement, no cell phones and no texting, if anyone is texting, anyone can call the person out.
Mhm.
And then I try to develop that as a skill inside the group, so that anyone calls the working agreement, not the meeting facilitator. That's important too. That's part of learning to build the capacity of our team.
Yep.
And working agreements can be very good, very useful. Sometimes it's funny because they're really just to create a little bit of permission
Mm.
for people. And sometimes people will see, and they'll say, oh, this is this big monster thing. And when you're in the conversation, it's much easier and it flows. But sometimes just the fact of saying it kind of creates a bit of space as well.
So I would definitely, that has definitely been my experience is that when we know what the expectations are, we feel safe inside of that. And call it a working
Yes.
agreement, call it whatever, allowing that safety to be explicit in that way, I have found to be, and listen, it can go awry. So,
Yeah.
there's be careful. There's
We've
lots
all
of it.
seen it.
Don't, right. But it can absolutely create such a safe space for people because they know what to expect and they know what they can and can't do. And one of the scariest things is not knowing. It's
Yes.
leaving that space for fear and assumption.
Yeah. But to come back to what you were saying earlier for the introvert, it's not because in the word working agreement you say everyone is expected to speak that they're going to speak outside of their turn. So sometimes it's about being able to also get them to speak out of turn. So if someone brings up something and they have an opposite agreement, it's about pulling them in and saying, I've heard you say something different in the past, Sid. What do you think about this right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then your working agreement plus that kind of makes it okay, kind of opens it up for people.
Mhm. Yeah.
But it's really putting yourself in a mode where it doesn't need to be perfect right away. It's about practicing to do this together, and we will get there after a month, after 2 months, because we're learning to play. So it's not about the instant result. And
No.
that's the third skill, building capacity, and that's the fifth skill, learning by doing.
Yeah. Practice makes progress, right?
Yes. Yeah. Nice shift of perspective there.
Um, so before we wrap up, Stefan, because this has been a really, really interesting conversation, and I appreciate you sharing your perspective on all of these things and, really kind of highlighting those 5 skills for people in a way that is easy to digest, because I do think it's really important. But before we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to touch on or that you want to emphasize at this point? Or the answer can be no, I'm complete and whole and this is good.
I think the only thing I'm going to say is see it as a journey, because no one, I'd like to think that when we try to grow as leaders, whatever we try to do, we need to accept we're not going to get it right the first time. And we need to accept that it's okay for people to see us that way. Because if people can see us that way, it creates permission for them to do the same thing and to try things and to be imperfect as well. So I think if there's one thing that I need to circle back on with everything we said, that would be it.
Perfect. Um, I really appreciate, so for anyone who's listening or watching, there will be links for Stefan in the show notes. But you can check out his website at Surdek, SURDEK.com. And I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today, Stefan. It's been a pleasure and this has been really valuable. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and it's been a great time chatting together like this.
Thanks for joining me today on the Leading Through Crisis podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a minute to rate and review us on your podcast app. If you're interested in learning more about any of our guests, you can find us online at www.leadingthroughcrisis.ca.